so that you can.
Good morning and good afternoon to all of our colleagues in IHH around the world. Welcome to the keynote session with Sudeep. Sudeep, hi. Sudeep is the Executive Director for the Center for Global Inclusion, a nonprofit based out of the US, but really works all around the world. They offer benchmarks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and their mission is really to educate and offer research in the areas of DEI. And last but not least, I am very, very proud and humbled to report that Sudeep is an ex-IHH colleague. He was actually one of our HR colleagues in the Gleneagles KL office when he started many, many years ago. Sudeep, welcome to IHH and to our HR Summit today.
Thank you, Shailaja, and thank you, IHH, for welcoming me and giving me this opportunity to spend some time with all of you. It's good to see the alumni.
And with that, we're off. So Sudeep, your journey has been fascinating. And from the time I've spent talking to you, I'd really like to know what that journey has been like and how have your views in the space of DEI evolved over your many rich and varied life and work experiences.
Oh, you make me so special. I think I like to start by first saying that I grew up in an environment with a lot of doctors, nurses, and scientists. In fact, my father, who is very well known more on the CDS in medicine, he was the late Dr. A. Mohandas, who was a neurosurgeon. And he was one of the people at that time who actually worked with Professor Shelley Shue in the United States, and they came out with and made a lot of noise about the terminology brain death. This is in 1963, and all of you would have heard of this, and now it's normal. But due to the early 1960s, the cancel culture was actually introduced, and today you all probably know about cancel culture, where people's names get erased from certain elements of their success. So we only get to hear about people who are politicians, celebrities, business people, and what they have achieved, but we don't hear about the ordinary person. So that was my early exposure to discrimination, racism, polarization, marginalization. And let's not fool ourselves. It happens all over the world. And later after that, I moved on to I took because of that experience, it was close to my heart. I decided to go into not medicine, although I was pushed into this area. I went into biochemistry and eventually became a scientist, where I was working in University of Malaya, working on infectious diseases at that time.
Wow.
On melioidosis and typhoid. But because my father, who was a very close associate to me, he was a friend, he was a brother, soulmate, he passed away suddenly, tragically. I lost everything, including the fact that my motivation, my mojo to do my PhD at that time just dropped. To which then I looked internally and found myself that I'm very much a person who likes to work with mankind and do humanitarian work, because at that time, I was doing a lot of work on AIDS in Africa, and if you recall, just like the monkeypox that's happening, AIDS at that time when it first came out was associated with a particular community.
Yes.
And on that basis, but I worked very hard on that to make sure that this stigma was not associated. But unfortunately, working in that community, I got myself so much involved, and I was in one of the early founders of my brainchild to set up the Malaysian AIDS Foundation, to which after that Marina Mahathir took over. One little story is that because I got so involved in AIDS, people thought I was a homosexual at that time. That's how the stigma came, and the whole family got stigmatized with that whole process. And this was in the early 90s. Anyway, so I realized that I can do a lot of work as a nonprofit, which is why then I moved into WWF, Amnesty, and right now I'm with the Center for Global Inclusion here in the United States, which is working on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Oh, that's a fascinating journey, I have to say. And I can clearly see you're absolutely driven with the passion to be of service, whether in healthcare or in the medical field or through research or working with nonprofits. And your own personal experience with discrimination, how has that shaped you as in and shaped your own drive and motivation, Sudeep?
Oh, it has certainly. In fact, I will be coming up with a book of discrimination in Asia next year. I've written a lot of so that'll hopefully that'll book will be it. I just hope I don't get banned. But I think the point is that it has certainly shaped my life. In school in the early 80s, it started to entrench in school. It got into sports. I'm very heavily involved in sports. It got into university life. It got into my career. And so it was there. It was there. And, you know, as an Asian, I believe we have an inbuilt radar to sense whether we are polarized, marginalized, discriminated. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think any scientist has looked for this gene that has a radar sense. But the moment you feel it, you kind of know what it is. Sometimes you can't articulate it, but it's there.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and you're absolutely right. It is a feeling rather than a cognitive thought process. You feel the bias and you feel the discrimination and you feel the judgments. Okay, so just building off of that, Sudeep, clearly DEI is very, very important to you. And you know that in IHH, we've begun our journey on sustainability. So what is your view? How do you think the diversity agenda works to build a sustainable workforce?
Oh, so there are many angles. I think when you talk about the diversity agenda, a sustainable, first we have to ask ourselves the question about what is sustainability. And in the context of sustainability, at least in the DI, it's about keeping us going in the long run. And in order to keep us going in the long run, it's important to actually have some crystal ball idea of where things are moving. So the way I look at it is, if particularly in the DI, HR people, or the people who are working as DEI practitioners do need to understand what are the global trends, especially since you're a global company. You have to understand in terms of what is the birth rate that's happening. You'd have to know what's the pipeline of people who are coming out. Is it a diverse community that's happening in the population in that particular area where you're set up? In terms of basically the kind of pipeline in terms of are people actually applying to be a nurse or be a laboratory person, or they want to be a technical person in anything. So that data always is really important to actually have some idea. And I think it's important for especially an organization like you to actually invest in that kind of research, someone who comes up with that kind of intelligence, so that you can actually have an idea where the future is actually moving. And then you build yourself in that way, because as much as we know, people will say, oh yeah, we can see a lot of doctors coming out or a lot of lawyers coming out. But what they don't tell you is that a lot of these lawyers may come out as lawyers or doctors, but then they end up in different jobs because they just did it for the sake of just, doing it. But now they've moved on. So we have to understand the intelligence and appreciate that. The other element I like to say is that also look at your current workforce, because if you have a trend to say that the demographics of your workforce and how it is moving over the time, it'll give you an idea of where the communities are interested in moving. You see more of a particular community going into your area of business or not in different sense. So all this data and how you analyze it will help you very much in actually pushing yourself forward.
So I'm going to ask you a challenging question now, Sudeep, based on what you've said, but also you're one of us. So you know the hospital industry, you know the healthcare industry. Do you really think that we can have an effective DEI agenda in the healthcare industry? Is this workable? Is this viable?
The answer is yes and no.
Okay.
And I will start off by first saying that I'm also an adjunct professor here on conflict management in the healthcare department here at Towson University.
Yeah.
And we talk about agendas. And since you mentioned agenda, I always say there are three kinds of agendas.
Yes.
The first one is your program agenda, meaning the one that lays out what you're going to be doing for the day. And then there's also the personal agenda, because some people will attend that meeting and some people will not, because it doesn't meet their personal agenda. But then there's a third agenda, and that is the hidden agenda. Because at the end of the day, what is the benefit that's going to come in the big space? Yeah. And I think when we talk about how does this agenda fit in the work that you all are doing, I would say it very much depends on which part of the agenda you're coming from. Right. If it's purely on a formal element, that's fine. But if you're looking at from a personal agenda, then you probably may not see the fit. So it's very much on that basis. What kind of agenda are we talking about?
So I think for us, both an organizational agenda, we obviously want to create a workforce that is sustainable for the future. We want to create an environment in which people are treated with empathy and care. We want to create an environment of inclusion and psychological safety. And of course, there is a very heavy overlay between both the diversity and the well-being agenda. So if you're stressed at work, you have a challenge of mental well-being, but then you can also have a supportive team or a line manager around you who can then step in to provide and take away some of that stress, or perhaps show some behavior of inclusion or of safety, which can help to alleviate all of that. So it is an integrated agenda, but sometimes it does happen that especially in the context of COVID, we are very heavily entrenched and involved in the operational day-to-day reality. And that drives us to behaviors and situations where we get to the default of what we have always operated with before, rather than how we should be managing and leading in the new way. And that's really where the question came from. The agenda is clearly a sustainable one.
So on that basis, Shailaja, I think we have to understand that, and this is the way I look at it. Yeah. HR practitioners have two forms of their customers, two different kinds of customers. One is the internal customers, and the other one is the external customers. Yeah. So the internal customers, so I'm preaching basically to the choir here, but all of you actually know that I don't know, what is it? How many thousands of employees?
65,000 plus employees.
There we go. That's your internal customers. And you will know all of them are there on a contractual basis. So their obligations are to the mission and of your organization. But then you also got a set of your external customers, who are people who walk in, and your patients and all that, who equally, the moment they enter your space, they're driving. Absolutely. So in the DEI element, it's like this. I put it into a family context. Yeah. If you're a parent and you are managing your children, how do you make them feel that they understand DEI, they understand the elements of it? You got to take them through a process, meaning that you have to show by leadership, meaning that if there is a festivity, an activity, when you actually make decisions, do you include them in? When you actually go and attend certain meetings and functions, do they see a diverse crowd? Do you encourage them to learn different languages? Do you actually bring different cultures into the whole mix? So if, as a parent, if you're doing that already, the children will naturally grow up to see this. Now, whether they pick it up is a different story, but they will see it. And at some point in time, as they get a little older with the organization, they will begin to understand this is how we work. And they will continually do that. So over time, everyone will start to work in that same manner. Absolutely. And at the same time, when, let's say, for example, when you have people who come and visit you, or you have guests and all that, you treat them in the way that they feel comfortable. So if I'm in this case, I'm a Indian Malaysian, I have my Chinese friends come, my Malay friends come, my friends from Ibans or Dayas, for whatever part, they come to my house. I got to make them comfortable the way they are comfortable. So which means that, try to speak the lingo, understand their culture, make sure that and if my children see that, they understand that I'm adapting and accommodating, then they will also pick it up. So I think it's very much at the leadership level. And secondly is the operational level, which means that, has management set a budget for this? Has management dedicated a particular staff for this? Has management put this in the agenda for meetings? Because all this shows, at the end of the day, because only then people see it's an important component to your business.
Well, absolutely. Yes, and yes to many of the things that you've talked about, but you're absolutely right. It is really ultimately about how we treat each other. The heart of DEIB is really respect for humanity, and really the humanness with which we interact with each other, irrespective of what our race, our religion, our caste, our height, our weight, our gender, our preferences, none of those matter. It's really how we interact as human beings. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit, Sudeep. You obviously lead the Center for Global Inclusion. Tell us a little bit about what your own agenda or the agenda of your organization is, and how are organizations really using these benchmarks? Any names that we are familiar with? What's happening in that space?
Sure.
Or in the outside space? Yes.
Sure. So what is started as a 4-letter acronym, what is GDIB? That means the Global Diversity Inclusion Benchmarks, which was in 2016. Now has evolved to the GDEIB, Global Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Benchmarks. And there's other elements. If you're in social justice and you love Star Wars, you love this acronym. It's called JEDI. Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So there are acronyms coming up, and just recently our newsletter is posted because it's Pride Month about SOGIE. That's another acronym that's coming out, SOGIE. So we are in the business really about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and we take this all in the full context. And our objective here is it is not a quick fix. Let's just make this very clear. If you want to make sure that it's not about putting things and putting decorations and saying, okay, now we are seen to be that, or we celebrate the festivity. No, that's not how it works. We got to look into the details of our policies, our procedures, our supply chain, our behavior, the mental health, everything that we do in business. And I can give you an example. How people don't understand, for example, auto pay. Now, if you just think about auto pay is considered as a benefit to many people. And which means that, but there's an assumption that marginalizes people, and people don't realize it. So people say, if you use by auto pay, you'll get a discount, and therefore the payment will be paid regularly, and that's it. But really, it's a benefit to the organization, and it discriminates people. Let me give you the reason why. Because you're making an assumption that people will have that salary on that day, will actually have that income on that day. Now, making the assumption that everybody is getting a secure income on that month, on that day. There are many people who work many jobs, and although there are people who get a monthly salary, but for some reason, they have to move their money around, and they may not have that money on that particular day. So immediately you're marginalizing people. So it goes down to the brass tacks about
the nuances. Absolutely. And there's that key message right there, which is about saying it's not just about the big picture, but it's really the devil's in the details. And that's a very powerful message. So we're almost at the close of our time, Sudeep, but you know that we're embarking on this very ambitious journey, but a very meaningful journey for all of us around the group. What big message would you like to share with our fellow HR colleagues, and actually you're one of your fellow HR colleagues around the world, as we embark on this journey?
Okay, so I'm actually reminded about something that is quite interesting, and that is basically about cultural humility. I'm not sure whether you all have heard about it. It was something that was actually coined from the medical field.
Tell us about it.
So cultural humility is all about, actually was coined from the physical healthcare, and it was actually taken on board by social workers in the healthcare, medical librarians who are in the healthcare, people who are therapists in healthcare, where they and it was found in the US, where all these people actually interact with diverse groups.
Right.
And in their business, they have to include all these diverse groups in their decision making in the work they do.
Right.
It was a very interesting study back in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And this researcher came out with a term called cultural humility, and said that, look, what they're doing is they're finding that they are able to be much more productive when they actually work with diverse groups and set up
Right.
inclusion elements.
Right.
And the result of that was their work got much better.
Right.
Now it is grown and it's taken much more into the healthcare business,
Right.
and has grown outside the United States. Although it's come from here, but
Right.
it's a lot of people actually have adopted it. So I would like to leave you with just study a little bit more about the cultural humility element, and that will be a great way to start.
That is a great message. And it is with absolute humility, I can say, Sudeep, it's been a terrific learning experience for me, both on a personal level and a professional level, to have this conversation with you. And to all of our colleagues, I will circulate details about the Center for Global Inclusion website. So if you want to check it out and see further details, happy to share that. If you've got any questions, please drop them in the chat box and we make sure they get answered. We may not have time to cover all of those questions today, but I assure you, you'll get answers. If not today, then later. And that's all we have time for. Sudeep, thank you again very, very much for your time. And we look forward to a continued conversation and connection with you.
Thank you, Shailaja.
Oh, well, I don't know about you all, but I'm exhausted. So we've got a lot of questions coming in, and as we've been speaking, we've been monitoring the chat box. So I'm going to just run through the questions. My apologies to everyone. Dr. Sudeep is not able to stay for the Q&A session, but if you've got any questions specifically for him, please drop them in the chat box or reach out directly to him at the Center for Global Inclusion. We will share the link for the website, and you'll be able to access Dr. Sudeep through that. So without further ado, I'm going to dive straight into the questions. So the first question, will we be having a DEI strategy for our organization? The answer, yes, absolutely. We will be working with each of the markets individually to help to create a localized diversity, equity, inclusion strategy and an action plan, working with the HR leaders and different members in different sub-functions of HRs, for example, recruitment, rewards, etc., to help to create a strategy that we can really use to embed in each of our markets. So now I've got another question. Which hospital did Dr. Sudeep work as an HR head in while he was with IHH? So he was actually with our Gleneagles KL Hospital. So he was the HR head when the hospital was initiated. This was, of course, many, many years ago. So like I said, he's one of us. He's an alumni. Okay, so the next question. Where are the diversity global benchmarks that Dr. Sudeep was talking about? Well, the benchmarks are available on the website, the Center for Global Inclusion. Justina has just dropped those details in your chat box. Do copy that and you can access the link. We will also be circulating the link at the end of the summit in case you've missed that. Okay, so I'm going to pause on those questions, and I've got some questions in the chat box here as well, and I've got some time to answer that. So reading from the bottom, do you think DEIB needs to be structured based on each country's national regulations and cultural identity? Well, the answer is yes and no. There are elements that are in common. So say, for example, if you look at the 5 dimensions of diversity, we want to be focusing on gender diversity or differently abled diversity. For example, there are certainly elements that each market can do around aspects of that, but they can do that differently. Actually, in the next 3 days, yes, well, today, tomorrow, and day after, you will see examples of how best practices, how markets have implemented different aspects of diversity in their markets. And in many places, different markets are doing very different things around the same topic. So that's the yes part of the answer. The no part is definitely that there are some nuances that you need to be mindful of when you're operating in each of these markets. And therefore, we are definitely looking at a market-wise localized strategy and implementation plan. And the idea really is to work with each of these, each of the markets at an individual level. We do have the central framework of the 5 dimensions of DEIB. That hold the framework together. The other aspect that we can all certainly work on across the group is the element of inclusion, belonging, and psychological safety. Now, we've already done some work on this in the previous years. We will continue doing that. How can line managers, for example, create safe spaces, psychologically safe spaces? How can they show more inclusive behaviors and create a more inclusive environment for their teams and the colleagues that they work with. So that's an area that we can certainly work across, irrespective of whichever market we're working on. The third aspect of belonging, how can we really create an environment for our colleagues, and especially in the as HR practitioners and HR colleagues, and in the spirit of service for the rest of the organization? What can we do? What are the kind of policies that we can create? What are the systems and processes that we can have which can create that sense of belonging? And how can we really nurture and expand that? Sharon, you've asked for a question, which I think is to Dr. Sudeep. I will pass that on to him, and we will get a reply back for him. But from my part, we can talk about time being definitely of an essence in DI. If you look at around the world, there has been a lot of progress and a lot of movement. Conversations like this that we're having here today are certainly being held in many other industries in many geographies around the world, whether it's topical issues like Black Lives Matter, or something that's specific in the US, or the refugee crisis, social mobility, and all of that. The other aspect that people are talking about a lot in when we talk about DEI is that element of sustainability. How do we make organizations sustainable? So the conversation has certainly, as you know, picked up great momentum in IHH over the past couple of years. And we are progressing in a very structured manner, and how can we really create a sustainable organization for ourselves and our people. So yes, definitely, Sharon. And I'm sure Dr. Sudeep will echo my thoughts. He, of course, has a truly global and a much wider perspective on that. So I've got time for the last question. Sorry, I just dropped my question sheet. What is cultural humility? Now, Dr. Sudeep did reference this. The idea is, and I can share more research and an article based on the concept of cultural humility, but in the last 1 minute to give you just an overview of what it talks about. It really talks about having respect for one's own culture, as well as having respect for the other cultures that we're interacting with, and then coming with a space of respect and affirmation. So that element of humility in behavior, when we say that there are things that we do differently, not things that we do rightly or wrongly, but things that we do differently. And similarly, there are other cultures that do things differently. And then how can we approach each other and interact with each other, and then work with each other with that sense of humility and acceptance. So really a very positive, affirmative space. Right, I think that's all we've got time for. And I've also seen that we have no more questions on our screen. So with this, I'm going to hand over to our next segment on gender diversity. So Arpita, if you're there, I now pass the baton of the HR Summit over to you.